She was 16 years old, alone in a hospital hallway, and the boy who swore he would never leave her was already gone. No note, no call, no explanation. Just an empty chair where Kang Jae-min used to sit, and a doctor telling Amara Whitfield that the baby she had been terrified to love was gone too. 2 losses in a single night. For 13 years, she believed he chose to abandon her. She was wrong. And the truth, when it finally comes, will destroy everything she built to survive without him. If this story already has your heart, hit like and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. This is only the beginning. The night Amara Whitfield turned 34, she did not celebrate. She stood at the window of her 3rd-floor apartment in Brooklyn, a glass of water in her hand because she had stopped drinking years ago. Not from discipline, but because alcohol made her remember things she had spent a decade training herself to forget. The city below was loud and indifferent the way New York always was after midnight, cabs cutting through puddles, someone arguing outside the bodega across the street, a dog barking at nothing. Amara watched all of it and felt very far away. She was good at that. Distance. She had built her whole adult life on the architecture of controlled distance, close enough to help people, far enough that no one could reach the parts of her that still hadn't healed. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Her best friend Danielle had sent 3 messages in a row, each one a variation of, "Where are you? It's your birthday. Get out of that apartment." Amara set the phone face down without answering. Danielle meant well. Danielle always meant well. But Amara knew that if she went out tonight, someone would ask her what she was celebrating, and she would have to smile and say 34, and then someone would say, "Well, do you have kids? Do you have someone? What are you building?" And she would have to stand there, holding a glass of sparkling water, and answer all of it like a woman who was perfectly fine. She was not perfectly fine. She was functioning. There was a difference. Amara moved away from the window and sat down at the small table where she kept her work files. She was a community advocacy coordinator for a nonprofit in the Bronx to low pay, long hours, the kind of work that mattered and exhausted you in equal measure. She had been good at it for 7 years. She was organized. She was focused. She understood how to navigate bureaucracies and politicians and landlords who tried to push working families out of neighborhoods they had lived in for 3 generations. She was effective because she was relentless, and she was relentless because staying still, truly still, with nowhere to put her attention, was something she could not afford. On the table, beside a stack of files, was a small envelope. It had arrived in the mail 3 days ago. No return address. New York postmark. Inside was a single photograph, printed on plain paper, slightly blurred at the edges the way things looked when someone zoomed in too far on a phone camera. It was a picture of a man in a dark suit stepping out of a car on a Manhattan street. His face was turned slightly, not looking at the camera, but the jaw was unmistakable. The way he held his shoulders, the particular stillness that his body had even in motion, like he was always operating at a frequency just below what other people could hear. Amara had stared at that photograph for 3 days. She had told herself it wasn't him. She had told herself that people looked alike, that memory was unreliable, that 13 years could change a face so completely that you could project anyone onto a stranger in a blurry photograph. She had not thrown the photograph away. She picked it up now and looked at it again under the kitchen light. Her coffee was going cold beside her. Outside, the dog was still barking. The man in the photograph had one hand on the door of the car and was looking at something off to the left, out of frame. He wore a dark overcoat and underneath it, the lapel of a suit that cost more than Amara's monthly rent. He was surrounded by 2 men who walked close but slightly behind, the body language of people paid to watch and react. She had worked in advocacy long enough to recognize the posture of protected men. She set the photograph down. Then she picked it up again. Then she put it in the envelope and put the envelope in the drawer and closed the drawer and sat down and stared at the wall for a long time. Kang Jae-min. The name came out of her like exhaled breath. She hadn't said it out loud in years. She had made a rule about that. Not a dramatic rule, not one she ever told anyone about, just a private decision made sometime around year 3 or 4 of trying to rebuild herself. She would not say his name. Names had weight. Names made things real, and she had needed very badly for what happened with Jaemin to become unreal. Manageable, historical. something that had happened to a younger version of herself who no longer existed. She pulled the drawer open again and took out the photograph. The rational part of her mind, the part she had spent a decade reinforcing, said this. The Baekryong Syndicate operated out of Seoul. She had read about them years ago, during a period in her 20s when she had done something she was not proud of, which was spend 3 weeks researching Kang Jae-min online with the methodical desperation of someone trying to understand how a person could disappear. The Baekryong Syndicate was one of the most powerful underground organizations in Korea. They controlled logistics, real estate, private security. They had reach in Japan and parts of Southeast Asia. They were not the kind of organization that put their leadership on planes to New York for casual visits. So the rational explanation was that this was not Jae-min, or that if it was, it had nothing to do with her, and the photograph was some kind of mistake. The rational explanation was not what her body believed. Her body had a different read on the situation. Her body, which she generally considered unreliable on this particular subject, was telling her that she already knew exactly who that man was, and that whoever had sent her this photograph had done it deliberately, and that something was about to happen whether she was ready for it or not. She went to bed at 2 in the morning and did not sleep until almost 5. She found out he was in the city on a Thursday afternoon. She was in a coffee shop in Midtown, waiting for a city council staffer she was supposed to meet about a rezoning dispute in the South Bronx, when she overheard 2 men at the next table speaking in Korean. Her Korean was conversational, at best. She had spent time learning it when she was a teenager for reasons she did not permit herself to examine in detail. But she caught enough. A name. A building. An impression that someone important had arrived and that people were paying attention. She looked at her phone. She scrolled to a contact she had not called in 2 years, Marcus Webb, who worked in financial crime investigation and owed her a favor she had been deliberately not cashing in because she hadn't wanted to use it on this. She sent him a text. Is anyone from the Baekryong Syndicate in New York right now? His response came back 40 minutes later, which meant he had checked before answering, which already told her something. Why do you ask? She typed, because I think I saw someone. He called her instead of texting back. She stepped outside the coffee shop into the March wind and answered. Amara. His voice was careful. Where did you see him? A photograph. Someone sent it to me. Silence on his end. Then, when? Last week. Marcus. Is he here? Another silence. Longer this time. She listened to him breathe and felt the cold moving through her jacket and counted cabs to keep herself steady. The Baekryong Syndicate sent a delegation to New York 6 days ago, Marcus said finally. Business dealings, nothing official on our end. We're aware of them. How long are they here? We don't know. Amara, he paused. What's your connection to this? I don't have one, she said. I just needed to know. She hung up before he could ask anything else. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the wind pulling at her hair, her whole body very still, the city loud and indifferent around her. Then she went back inside, apologized to the city council staffer for being late, and spent the next 90 minutes talking about zoning laws with the focused professionalism of a woman who had not just had the ground reorganize itself beneath her feet. She was very good at that. She saw him 10 days later, and she was not ready. She had been telling herself she was preparing for us, that she was processing the information, deciding rationally how to respond, identifying the realistic possibilities. She had been telling herself this while also not sleeping properly and eating on autopilot and checking the drawer where she kept the photograph more often than she would admit. None of that was preparation. That was just waiting. She was coming out of a community meeting in Lower Manhattan when she saw the black car parked half a block down, and the 2 men flanking the door, and then the door opening, and him. 13 years. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she was just remembering him wrong. She had been 16, and he had still been growing, and the man getting out of that car now was not the boy she had known. He wore the same kind of dark suit she had seen in the photograph. His face was older, sharper. The jaw she remembered still there but harder, carved down to something that had very little excess in it. He had cut his hair shorter than he used to wear it. He moved with absolute deliberate economy, like a man who had spent years making sure that nothing about him was accidental. He was looking at his phone when she saw him. She stopped walking. She was 30 feet away, maybe less, on a sidewalk full of people who were all moving around her like water around a stone. She could not move. Her chest had done something complicated that wasn't quite pain, more like pressure, like the sensation of a room losing oxygen. He looked up, and he saw her. She watched it happen, watched the exact moment his eyes landed on her face. Whatever he had been thinking about before that moment simply stopped. His entire body registered her presence the way an electric current registers a break in a wire. Immediate, complete, irreversible. For a long second, neither of them moved. Then one of the men beside him said something low and close to his ear, and Jamin raised one hand. A small movement, barely anything. And the man fell quiet and stepped back. Jamin crossed the distance between them. He stopped 3 feet away. Close enough that she could see his eyes clearly, and his eyes had not changed. That was the thing that hit her hardest, unexpectedly. Everything else was different. The face, the suit, the weight of whatever life he had been living for 13 years, but his eyes were the same. Dark and direct, and full of something he had never been entirely able to hide. Amara, he said. Just her name. Nothing else. Like he had been practicing how to say it carefully, or like he had been afraid of what he would do if he didn't control the first word. She looked at him. She felt everything, and none of it was clean. It wasn't grief or anger or relief by itself. It was all of them mixed together into something that had no name, just a texture, thick and specific. "You're in my city," she said. It was not what she had planned to say. She hadn't planned to say anything, but her mouth found those words before she could make a better choice, and once they were out, she did not apologize for them. Something moved through his expression. It might have been the beginning of a different kind of pain. "I know," he said. "Then you know that's a problem." He did not look away from her. "Can we talk?" "We're talking right now. Somewhere that isn't—" He glanced briefly at the street, the people, the two men still positioned near the car. "Somewhere private." "No," she said. The word came out flat and certain, and she meant it, and she watched him absorb it. "Amara, I don't know what you're doing here," she said, her voice quiet enough that it didn't carry, controlled enough that her hands stayed still at her sides. "I don't know why someone sent me that photograph. I don't know what you want after 13 years of nothing, and I'm telling you right now that I'm not ready to have this conversation." A muscle moved in his jaw. "Neither am I," he said, "but we need to. I decide when I'm ready." "You've had 13 years," he said quietly. The words were not cruel, but they had weight. "So have I." She stared at him. Something in the back of her throat tightened. "You left," she said. The two words landed between them like objects dropped on concrete. His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he was going to argue with her, or explain, or do what powerful men always did when confronted, which was reframe the problem. But he didn't. He stood there and absorbed what she had said the way someone absorbs something they have been carrying for years and have never been allowed to put down. "I know what you believe," he said. "I need you to know that what you believe is not what happened." Amara took a breath. The March air was cold and tasted like exhaust. On the sidewalk around them, people moved past without caring, which was a kindness New York extended without meaning to. "I have a meeting," she said. "I'll find you," she said. "Don't come to my apartment. Don't send anyone. Don't put anything in my mailbox. When I'm ready to talk, I'll find you." She looked at him for one more second, long enough to confirm that he was real, that this was actually happening, that the ground beneath her was going to need rebuilding. And then she turned and walked away. She made it to the end of the block before her hands started shaking. She waited 8 days. She wasn't proud of it. 8 days was not strategy. 8 days was fear dressed up as composure. She went to work and ran her meetings and filed her reports and called Danielle twice without telling her anything real. And every night she sat at the kitchen table with the photograph and the knowledge that Kang Jae-min was somewhere in this city and had looked at her like 13 years of searching had just ended. She thought about the hospital, the hallway, the chair that was empty. She thought about the miscarriage. She was clinical about that word now. Miscarriage. The way you got clinical about things that had once destroyed you, because clinical was survivable. She had been 16 weeks along and 16 years old, and she had sat in that hallway alone while the doctor explained what her body had done and could not undo. And the only thing that had made it endurable was the knowledge that Jamin was coming. He had told her he was coming. He had told her that no matter what his family said, no matter what they tried to do, he was going to be there. He wasn't there. He was not there the next day, or the day after that. She never heard from him again. She was 16 years old, and she was in a hospital, and she was alone. And then she was 18, and she was in college. And then she was 23 and working her first real job. And every year added another layer over the specific wound of that waiting, until the woman who existed now was so far from the girl in that hallway that Amara sometimes believed she had actually escaped it. She had not escaped it. It was there every time a doctor mentioned her reproductive history. It was there every time someone asked her if she wanted children, and she said, "I'm not sure yet," instead of the truth. It was there in the photograph in the drawer, and in the 8 days she spent convincing herself she didn't care. On the 9th day, she called the number Marcus had quietly provided at the end of their phone call, the one he hadn't had to give her but had anyway, because even investigators who dealt with transnational crime still had functional consciences. The phone rang twice. Jamin answered on the second ring. She could hear the quietness on his end. A room, not a street, something controlled. "I'll meet you," she said. "Tomorrow, neutral place. You come alone." A pause. "All right. I'm not doing this for you," she said. "I'm doing this because I've spent 13 years with half a story, and I'm done with that." "I know," he said. His voice was measured, but she could hear something beneath it. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that had been held under pressure for a very long time. "Amara," he said. "What?" "I never stopped." He stopped himself. She heard him breathe. "Tomorrow," he said instead. She hung up. She sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, her phone face down on the table, the city outside going on without her. She had thought that hearing his voice would make her angrier. Instead, she felt the specific terror of someone standing at the edge of a thing they have been avoiding for 13 years, looking down, finally understanding that the only way to stop being afraid of the fall is to decide, deliberately, with both eyes open, to jump. She did not sleep that night either, and at 2 a.m, she opened the drawer, took out the photograph, and sat with it under the kitchen light until the sky outside started turning gray. Whatever he was going to tell her tomorrow would either break the story she had survived on for 13 years or confirm it. Either way, she was done waiting to find out. She chose a diner in Queens, not Manhattan. Manhattan was his territory now, apparently, with the black cars and the suited men in the restaurants where people didn't ask questions about who was paying. Queens was hers. A place on a side street in Astoria with fluorescent lighting that hadn't been updated since the 90s, and coffee that came in ceramic mugs with chips in the handles, and a counter woman named Bet, who called everyone Han without irony. Amara had been coming here for 4 years. She knew which booth had the best sightline to the door. She got there 20 minutes early and ordered coffee she didn't drink and sat with her hands flat on the table and practiced being a person who was in control of herself. She was not in control of herself. But she was functional, which was close enough. He came in at exactly the time she had said. That was the first thing she noticed. Not early, not late, exactly on time, which meant he had been waiting somewhere nearby, which meant he had wanted to be early and made himself not be. She registered this without letting it mean anything. She watched him cross the diner toward her. No bodyguards, as she had asked, though she was not naive enough to think there weren't men outside. And the fluorescent light caught his face in a way that the photograph hadn't, and he looked tired in a way powerful men rarely allowed themselves to look. He sat down across from her. Betty appeared with a second mug. "Coffee, hun?" "Please," Jamin said. His English was precise and unaccented, which shouldn't have surprised her, but did. Bet poured and left. Amara looked at him across the table and thought, 13 years. The math of it was still strange. She had been a different person for longer than she had been the person who knew him, and still his face did something to the interior of her chest that she did not have a clean word for. "You look well," he said. "Don't do that," she said. He stopped, nodded once. "All right. I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer it before you say anything else. before you explain or contextualize or whatever it is you've been rehearsing. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't protest. Did you know? She said. When you left, did you know what was happening to me? The question sat between them. She watched him process it, not stall, not perform, actually process it, the way someone handles a question that has been waiting for them for a very long time. No, he said. That's not a complete answer. I know. He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. His knuckles were scarred in a way that had nothing to do with office work, and she noticed this and filed it without comment. I didn't know about the miscarriage until 2 years later. Something moved through her that she could not entirely suppress. Not a sound, just a shift, an internal reorganization of something she had been holding in one position for a very long time. 2 years, she said. I was in Seoul. My father had me on a plane within 36 hours of the night we were supposed to meet. His voice was flat and measured, but she could hear the effort in it. They took my phone. They cut off every line of communication I had to you. I didn't know the full extent of what they had done, what they told you, what they arranged, until later. Until one of my father's men got drunk and said something he shouldn't have. And then what? She said. You found out 2 years later, and then what? I tried to reach you. I never received anything. I know that now. He looked at her steadily. They intercepted everything. They had been monitoring outgoing communications since before I left. Anything I sent, letters, calls, anything routed through contacts, was stopped before it reached you. It took me 3 years to build the kind of independent infrastructure that my father's people couldn't touch. And by then what? By then I had been told you had moved on. The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere behind her, a plate hit a counter. Who told you that? She said. Someone my father paid to tell me. His voice didn't change temperature. A woman who claimed to have been your classmate, who said you had transferred schools, started over, that you had made it clear you didn't want to be found. Amara stared at him. They fabricated a source, she said. Yes. Someone you believed. I was 20 years old and I had been inside an organization that had been lying to me systematically for 2 years, he said. I wanted to believe it. That's the honest version. I wanted to believe that you were okay, that you had moved on and were building something, and that the damage I had been told I caused was... He stopped, set down the mug. That it was finite. The word finite hit her in a place she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't finite, she said. I know. I was 16 years old and I was in a hospital hallway by myself. I know. Don't say I know like that fixes anything. It doesn't fix anything, he said. I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here because you said you were done with half a story, and so am I. She looked at him. Her coffee was cold. Her hands were still flat on the table, which was deliberate, a way of keeping herself anchored to the physical fact of the surface beneath her palms. Why are you in New York? She said. Business dealings. They've been in process for 6 months. That's not why you're in New York. He held her gaze. No, he said. It's not the only reason. How long have you known I was here? 14 months. The number landed on her like a weight. 14 months, she repeated. I found you before I found the right way to approach this. I needed... He paused, and for the first time she saw something that was not control in his face. Just a crack, just a hairline fracture in the surface. I needed to be sure I wasn't going to make it worse. And the photograph someone sent me? His expression shifted. That wasn't me. She studied him. Then who? I have a theory, he said carefully. But I'm not ready to name it without being certain. That's not good enough. No, he agreed. It's not. Give me a few days. She leaned back slightly. The vinyl booth creaked. She looked at the man across the table and thought about all the different versions of this moment she had imagined over the years. The confrontations, the accusations, the things she would say when she finally got the chance to say them. In most of those versions, she had been angrier, or she had been colder, or she had said something precise and devastating that made him understand exactly what the absence of him had cost her. Instead, she felt tired, deeply, structurally tired. the kind that had nothing to do with sleep. I spent a year in therapy, she said, when I was 22. I told my therapist about you, not your name, not the details, just the shape of it. She said that unresolved grief from abandoned attachment doesn't go away. It just gets redirected. He was listening carefully. She could see him doing it, the quality of attention he was paying. I redirected it into my work, she said, into other people's problems, into being useful. She looked at him. I'm very useful, Jamin. I know you are. And I'm telling you that because I need you to understand that I survived this. I built something. I'm not a 16-year-old girl in a hospital anymore, and I'm not going to be treated like one. I don't see a 16-year-old girl, he said quietly. I see the woman you became. And I've been watching that woman from a distance for 14 months, and she is... He stopped again, like he was choosing his words with the care of someone diffusing something. Extraordinary. That's not flattery. It's a conclusion. The crack in her composure was small, and she closed it quickly. You don't get to say that to me, she said. Maybe not, he said. I said it anyway. They sat in that diner for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She hadn't planned that. She had planned for 1 hour, maximum, with a clear exit and an emotional inventory she could manage on the subway home. What happened instead was that 2 hours became almost 3, because once the first layer of confrontation settled, once the initial exchange of the facts of the betrayal and the facts of the abandonment had been laid out between them on the chipped formica table, what remained underneath was stranger and more difficult to navigate, which was the recognition that they were still, in some fundamental way, continuous with the people they had been at 16. Not the same. Nothing so simple, but continuous. The way a scar is continuous with a wound. He told her about his father, about the structure of the Baekryong syndicate and what it meant to be born into it as the designated heir, not chosen, not asked, simply designated, the way certain animals are designated to carry certain loads from birth. He told her about the first 3 years in Seoul, which were the worst years of his life, during which he had been stripped of every connection to anything that had existed before and rebuilt in the image of something the syndicate could use. He told her without self-pity, which she appreciated more than she expected. Did you hurt people? She asked. It was direct, and she meant it to be. He looked at her. Yes. People who didn't deserve it? A pause. I've tried very hard, he said carefully, to ensure that the people who get hurt are people who are already in the business of hurting others. I'm not going to tell you I've been perfect, but I have a code and I enforce it. A code, she said. That's what we're calling it. What would you call it? I don't know yet, she said. That was honest, and he seemed to accept it as such. She told him about the miscarriage in more detail than she had told almost anyone. She told him about the doctor who was kind and clinical and who had explained everything in the careful tone of someone who delivered bad news often enough to have developed a specific voice for it. She told him about the secondary diagnosis, the one that came 6 months later, after follow-up testing, the one that had said the word unlikely in the context of future pregnancies. She told him about being 17 years old and sitting across from a specialist who used words like scar tissue and probability, and watching the woman across the desk from her draw careful diagrams that explained why the future Amara had always assumed she would eventually have might not be available to her. She told him all of this without crying, because she had processed it, or she had done enough work on it that the surface was stable, but she noticed partway through that her right hand had moved across the table and Jamin's left hand was near it, not touching, just there, positioned close enough to touch, if she wanted to. She did not move her hand away. She did not move it closer either, but she noticed. 3 days later, he came to find her at her office. Not inside, but he wasn't that presumptuous. He was standing on the sidewalk outside the building when she came out at 6:15, and she stopped when she saw him, and something moved across her face that she couldn't control fast enough. I told you not to come to me, she said. I said I would reach out. I know, he said. I have something I need to tell you, and I didn't want to do it over the phone. The air between them had changed. She could feel it. He looked different than he had in the diner. The measured control was still there, but there was something underneath it that was tighter, more pressurized. What happened? She said. The photograph, he said. I know who sent it. She waited. It was sent by someone in my organization, he said. Someone who knew I was in New York and knew that you were here and made a decision to force contact before I was ready. Why? Because they want me destabilized, he said flatly. There is a faction within the Baekryong leadership that has been opposed to my authority for 2 years. They believe I have become, he paused, searching for the precise word, sentimental. That I've allowed my personal history to affect my judgment. They have been looking for a way to create a crisis and recently decided that you were the best instrument for one. Amar stared at him. The street noise continued around them, indifferent. They used me, she said. Yes. As a weapon against you. Yes. The anger that moved through her was clean and clear and had nothing ambiguous in it. It was the anger of someone who has just discovered they were maneuvered without their knowledge, which was different from all the complicated grief and confusion she had been carrying. It was simpler, colder, and it felt almost like relief. What are you going to do about it? She said. I've already started, he said. I wanted you to know before I moved, because the situation may draw attention, the kind of attention that could be directed at people connected to me. She understood what he was saying. She stood very straight. You're telling me I could be in danger, she said. I'm telling you I won't let that happen, he said. But I wanted you to know the full picture. And if I tell you to walk away, she said, if I say I don't want any part of this, any part of whatever it is you're managing, and you should go back to Seoul and stay there? He looked at her. The streetlight had come on while they were talking. It caught the side of his face and made him look older and very tired. Then I'll walk away, he said. She studied him. Would you, though? Yes, he said, if that's what you want. That's not an answer, she said. An answer would tell me what you want. I want... He stopped. Started again. I want a conversation that doesn't have 13 years of wrong information sitting in the middle of it. I want to be in the same room with you without feeling like I'm underwater. He held her gaze. I want to tell you everything that happened, from the beginning, and I want you to believe me. That's what I want, Amar. The rest of it... He gestured vaguely, and the gesture took in the black car idling at the end of the block. The men she knew were nearby, the entire apparatus of what he was. The rest of it is what I am, and I know that's not a simple thing to ask someone to look at. She was quiet for a long time. The wind moved between them. The faction, she said, the people inside your organization who sent me that photograph, are they dangerous? To me? Yes. To you specifically? Yes. She breathed. All right, she said. You need to deal with that. Something shifted in his face. And then, she said, and stopped herself. And then? He said quietly. She looked at him across the 6 inches of March air between them, and she thought about the diner, and the 2 hours and 40 minutes, and the way his hand had been positioned near hers without touching, and the word extraordinary said in the voice of someone who had been sitting with it for 14 months. And then I want the rest of the story, she said. He nodded once. Something in his shoulders moved, not visible relief, but the shadow of it, the somatic echo of someone putting down a weight for just a moment. I'll be in touch within the week, he said. Jamin. He stopped. She looked at him carefully. If any part of what you've told me turns out to be untrue, it won't. If it does, she said, I won't give you another conversation. He held her gaze. I know, he said. I know that. She turned and walked to the subway entrance, and she did not look back, and she got onto the train and sat down and watched the underground tunnel rush past the windows and felt the very specific sensation of a life she had organized around the absence of one person beginning to reorganize itself around the possibility of his presence. She was not ready for that. She wasn't sure she would ever be entirely ready. But 3 days later, at 11:40 in the evening, she received a message from a number she had saved under no name. It's handled. The faction has been removed from leadership. You're safe. I'll explain everything when you're ready to hear it. She stared at the message for a long time. Then, the following morning, she received a second message from a different number. One she did not recognize, one that showed no contact information, one that appeared and would later prove to have been sent from a disposable device that could not be traced. The message contained a photograph. In the photograph, a woman Amara did not recognize was sitting in what appeared to be a doctor's office, her profile visible, her posture the carefully composed posture of someone who knew they were being documented. The woman was visibly pregnant. Below the photograph, a single line of text. Ask Kang Jae-min about Yoona Seo. Ask him whose child that is. Amara sat at her kitchen table and looked at the photograph and felt the specific sensation of the ground she had just barely started to trust. She did not call him that night. She almost did. She had the phone in her hand twice, once at midnight, once at 2 in the morning, and both times she put it back down on the table and sat with the photograph and the single line of text and the particular stillness of a person who has just felt something familiar move beneath them. Not new pain, old pain. Wearing a new face. Ask Kang Jae-min about Yoona Seo. Ask him whose child that is. She knew what the message wanted her to do. It wanted her to react. It wanted her to pick up the phone in the middle of the night with her chest cracked open and her voice unsteady and confront him from a place of maximum vulnerability. And whoever had sent this knew enough about her, about the specific texture of what she had survived, to know that a pregnant woman in a photograph would be the most precise instrument available. She was not going to do that. Instead, she did what she always did when the ground moved. She worked. She opened her laptop at 2:15 in the morning, and she searched the name Yoona Seo with the methodical focus of someone who had learned that information was the only thing that reliably reduced the size of a threat. There was not much. A social media presence that was sparse and curated. A few photographs of events, nothing personal, nothing that showed the woman's daily life. A name mentioned in a Korean business publication from 3 years ago in a context that referenced a family with syndicate-adjacent connections. A photograph from what appeared to be a formal event, the woman in a dark dress, standing slightly apart from a group, her posture composed and closed off in the manner of someone accustomed to being observed. Amara studied the photograph for a long time. The woman was striking, controlled features, the particular kind of beauty that came with being maintained rather than natural. And she was approximately Amara's age, maybe a year or two older. There was nothing in her expression that suggested warmth. Amara closed the laptop at 3:40 and went to bed and lay on her back in the dark, and thought about what Jae-min had said in the diner. My marriage to Yoona was only a political arrangement. He hadn't volunteered that information unprompted. She had asked him directly whether there was anyone. She had framed it carefully, clinically, the way she framed things she didn't want to show too much feeling about. And he had told her about the arrangement. He had used the word arrangement. He had said, "We lived separate lives." He had not mentioned a pregnancy. She thought about that. The absence of information was not the same as a lie. She understood this. There were 100 reasons a man might not mention an ex-wife's pregnancy in the middle of a first real conversation after 13 years. Awkwardness, timing, uncertainty about whether it was relevant. She could construct a rational scaffolding around the omission, and it would hold weight. But she had spent 13 years being a woman who survived on rational scaffolding, and she was very aware of how much work that kind of construction required, and she was very tired. At 6 in the morning, she got up, made coffee, and called him. He answered on the first ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. "I need to see you today," she said. A pause. "All right? When?" "Now, this morning, wherever you are." "I'm at the hotel." He gave her the address without hesitation, which she noted. "I'll be there in an hour," she said. She hung up and drank her coffee standing at the window and watched the city get light. The hotel was in Midtown. Not ostentatious, discreet, the kind of place that cost significant money but wore it quietly. The lobby done in dark wood and muted lighting, the staff trained to look at you without appearing to look. One of Jae-min's men was in the lobby when she arrived. She recognized his posture, if not his face. He made a small phone call when he saw her and then directed her to the elevator without speaking. The suite was on the 14th floor. Jae-min opened the door himself. He was in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. No jacket, no tie. The controlled precision of his usual presentation was slightly undone, and she registered this the way she registered everything about him now. Carefully, against her will, with more attention than she wanted to be paying. "Come in," he said. The suite was large and impersonally furnished, the kind of space that had been lived in for weeks but had taken on none of the qualities of habitation. There were papers on the desk, a coffee cup. Evidence of work but nothing personal. She sat in the chair by the window and he sat across from her and did not offer her anything, which she appreciated, because she hadn't come here to be hosted. She took out her phone and placed it on the table between them, face up, the photograph visible. She watched his face. He looked at the photograph. She saw the exact moment he understood what he was looking at. A small contraction around the eyes, a stillness that came in over the controlled exterior like weather. "When did you receive this?" he said. "Last night, after your message." He sat back. He did not look away from the phone. "Who is she?" Amara said. "You already know who she is," he said. "You searched the name. I want to hear it from you." He looked up at her. "Yuna Seo, the woman I was arranged to marry 4 years ago. The arrangement ended 14 months ago. We have had no contact since. The photograph shows her pregnant. I can see that. Is the child yours?" The question sat between them. She had said it flat and direct, the way she said hard things without softening the edges. She watched him take it. "No," he said. "How certain are you?" Something moved across his face that might have been anger, but he held it. "Completely certain," he said. "The arrangement was political. We did not have a physical relationship." "You were married to her for 3 years and you didn't—" "No." His voice was controlled, but she could hear the concrete beneath it. "That is the truth, Amara. We lived in the same residence for the first year and in separate residences for the last 2. The syndicate required the appearance of a stable marriage for reasons that had everything to do with alliances and nothing to do with either of our preferences." She looked at him steadily. "And she's willing to lie about the child being yours." "Someone is using her," he said, "or she's making a choice to use herself." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and she could see the tightness in his shoulders. "The faction I told you I removed from leadership, removing people from positions doesn't eliminate them. It makes them motivated. This photograph sent to you the same night I told you the situation was handled. That is not a coincidence. So someone in your organization is still running operations against you." "Against us," he said quietly. The word us hit her somewhere she wasn't prepared for. "Don't," she said. "It's accurate." "We are not an us yet," she said. "I'm a woman sitting in your hotel room looking at a photograph of your ex-wife who may or may not be carrying your child. That is the current situation. Don't get ahead of it." He absorbed this without argument. She could see him doing it, choosing, consciously, not to push. "I want a paternity test," she said. "I want you to request one." "I'll do it today." "From a third party, not someone connected to you." "Agreed." "And I want to know," she said, "everything about the faction. Names, what they want, what they're capable of. Because if someone is willing to send me a photograph of a pregnant woman to hurt you, I need to understand the full scope of what I'm potentially in the middle of." He looked at her. There was something in his expression that she hadn't seen before. Not softness, but something adjacent to it. A recognition that had weight. "You're not running," he said. "I told you," she said. "I'm done with half a story." He told her about the faction over the next 2 hours, with the precision of someone who had been thinking about how to explain it for a long time. The Baekryong Syndicate had operated for 40 years under a council structure. 4 senior members beneath the head, each controlling a division of the organization's operations. When Jaemin's father retired and Jaemin took the leadership 7 years ago, 2 of those council members had accepted the transition. 2 had not. One of those 2, a man named Shin Dae-ho, who had been with the syndicate since before Jaemin was born and who had expected to inherit leadership himself, had spent the subsequent 7 years building quiet resistance. Shin Dae-ho was 61 years old, methodical, and patient in the way that people who had been waiting for a long time were patient. He had been systematically undermining Jaemin's authority through the kind of organizational erosion that was difficult to prove and easy to deny. Slow redirections of loyalty, quiet manipulations of information, the cultivation of doubt. He had identified Amara 14 months ago when Jaemin's own people first located her, and he had been watching ever since. The photograph sent to Amara was not the first move. It was the most recent move in a sequence that had been running for months. "He's trying to make you look unstable," she said. "A leader who is distracted by personal history, who can be manipulated through a woman." "Yes." "And Yuna?" Jamin's jaw tightened. Yuna's family has financial relationships with Shin. I didn't know the extent of that until recently. She is either being directed by him or she's making a calculation that aligning with him serves her interests. What does she want? Resources. Security. He paused. She knows that if Shin succeeds in taking the leadership, she loses the settlement from our arrangement. She needs leverage. And a child with your name on it, Amara said, would be leverage. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. The morning light had moved across the floor of the suite. Outside, 14 floors down, the city was fully operational and completely unaware. How dangerous is Shin? She said. Jamin looked at her directly. Dangerous enough that I'm not going to give you a number and let you calculate your own risk. That's not an answer. He has not historically targeted people outside the organization, Jamin said, but he's operating in escalating desperation right now. Desperate people expand their definition of acceptable targets. The word target sat in the room. You need to tell me the truth, she said. Is being near you a risk to me? He held her gaze. Right now? Yes, there is a non-zero risk. I am actively working to eliminate it. She appreciated the honesty enough to let it settle before she responded. Then you need to work faster, she said. Huang. She left the hotel at 10:15 and went to her office and did 6 hours of work with the focus of someone who needed the structure of other people's problems to keep her own at manageable distance. She ran 2 meetings. She reviewed a contract. She answered 43 emails. She was present and effective, and her colleagues noticed nothing, which was a skill she had honed to a very fine edge. At 4 in the afternoon, her phone rang. Number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Miss Whitfield. The voice was female, accented, precise. My name is Yuna Seo. I think we should meet. Amara's hand tightened on the phone. How did you get this number? She said. The same way you'll understand everything else, Yuna said, which is that people tell things to the people they trust, and trust is a more fragile structure than anyone likes to admit. What do you want? I want to have a conversation without Jamin in it. A pause. I think you want that too. Amara looked at her office wall. She thought about what Jamin had said, operating in escalating desperation. She thought about Shin Dai-ho, 61 years old and patient, and the sequence of moves that had been running for months. Where? She said. Somewhere public, Yuna said. I'm not interested in drama. I'm interested in information. They met an hour later at a wine bar in the West Village that Yuna had chosen. She was already seated when Amara arrived. A corner table, sight lines to the door, the same instinct that Amara had had in the diner in Astoria. She was wearing a coat that covered her midsection. Her face in person was more composed than the photograph had suggested, but there were shadows under her eyes that the composure was working to override. Amara sat down without being invited. You're not showing, Amara said. I'm 14 weeks, Yuna said. It's not visible in clothing yet. Then the photograph was taken recently. 3 weeks ago. Yuna's hands were flat on the table, a gesture that might have been unconscious or might have been deliberate, the same grounding gesture, Amara realized, that she herself used. I sent it. Amara looked at her. Directly? To me? Yes. Yuna's eyes were steady. Not through Shin, not through anyone. That was my decision. Why? Because Shin wanted to use it differently, Yuna said. He wanted to wait and deploy it at a moment that would cause maximum organizational damage. I decided I didn't want to be a weapon in someone else's hands. Amara studied her. So you put it in my hands instead. I put it in front of you so you could ask the question directly. Yuna paused. Has he told you the child isn't his? Yes. Did you believe him? The question was genuine. Amara could hear it. Not manipulative, not rhetorical, actually curious. I requested a paternity test, Amara said. I don't operate on belief alone. Something moved through Yuna's expression. It might have been respect. He's not the father, Yuna said. The air in the bar continued around them, undisturbed. Then why? Amara started. Because Shin told me that if I confirmed the child was Jai Min's, he would ensure the child was recognized and provided for, regardless of the paternity test outcome. Yuna's voice was very controlled. He told me that Jae Min would be removed from leadership within 6 months, and that the incoming council would honor whatever agreements Shin made on their behalf. And you believe that? I'm 14 weeks pregnant, and the father is a man who is not going to be present, Yuna said flatly. My options were limited, and Shin presented a specific one. I was considering it. She looked at Amara directly. I was considering it until 3 days ago when I found out what else Shin is planning. Amara went still. What is he planning? She said. Yuna picked up her water glass and set it down again without drinking. Her hands, Amara noticed, were not entirely steady. Shin doesn't just want the leadership, Yuna said. He wants to restructure the syndicate's American operations. He has been building relationships with 2 other organizations in this city for the past 18 months. Relationships that Jaemin doesn't know the full extent of. When he takes the leadership, he intends to consolidate those relationships into a formal arrangement. That's organizational politics, Amara said. That's not... He intends to use you as the mechanism, Yuna said. The sentence stopped everything. Explain that, Amara said. Her voice was very quiet. Your non-profit, Yuna said. The advocacy organization you work for. It operates in communities across 3 boroughs. It has relationships with city council members, community boards, local business associations. It has access and credibility and a reputation that has no connection to anything criminal. Yuna looked at her. Shin wants to use that access, not you personally, the organization. He wants to compromise it from the inside, and the way to do that, he has decided, is through you. Through me how? Your connection to Jaemin becomes public. The Baekryong Syndicate's head is romantically involved with the director of a nonprofit that works closely with city government. The right documents are filed in the right places. The right questions are asked. Your organization's funding gets scrutinized, investigations open. Yuna's voice was level, almost academic. You don't have to do anything wrong for this to destroy you. The association alone is enough. Amara sat in the wine bar and listened to the low music and the sound of other people's conversations, and felt the particular sensation of a trap that had been constructed around her while she was standing inside it, thinking she was just having dinner. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because Shin told me this plan as a demonstration of his capability, Yuna said. He was showing me what he could do. He thought it would convince me that he was the more powerful option. She paused. It convinced me of the opposite. You're afraid of him. I'm pregnant, and I am not an idiot, Yuna said. Those are not the same thing as afraid, but they produce similar conclusions. Amara looked at her for a long moment. Does Jaemin know about the plan to use the organization? No, Yuna said. He knows about Shin. He doesn't know the scope. He needs to know today. Yes, Yuna agreed. He does. Amara was already reaching for her phone. Then she stopped. She looked at Yuna across the table. The composed face, the shadows under her eyes, the hands that weren't entirely steady. And she thought about what it cost a woman to walk into a room with the person her choices had hurt and lay out her own culpability without being asked. The photograph you sent me, Amar said, you knew what it would do. Yes, Yuna said. I knew it would reopen something. I sent it anyway because I needed you in motion before Shin moved. That was a calculation. Yes. That used my history. Yes. Yuna did not look away. I'm not going to tell you it wasn't. I am telling you that the alternative was worse for both of us. Amara held her gaze for another moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Jaemin. He answered in 2 rings. Shin's plan is bigger than you know, she said. I'm with Yuna Seo. You need to come now. A pause on his end, very brief, a single controlled breath, and then, address. She gave it to him. She put the phone down and looked at Yuna and thought about the layered architecture of what the last 18 months had actually been. Not a love story reassembling itself, not a reunion, but a carefully constructed situation designed by a 61-year-old man with organizational patience to use every vulnerable thing about her. Her history, her work, her community, her reopening grief, as material for a power grab that had nothing to do with her and would destroy her as a side effect. She thought about the communities she worked for, the families, the years she had spent building credibility that could now be burned by association. She thought about Jae-min walking into that hotel lobby, knowing she was in danger and choosing to tell her anyway. She thought about the photograph in the drawer, the chair that had been empty, the 16-year-old girl in the hospital hallway. She was done being the side effect of other people's wars. Jaemin arrived 11 minutes later, and when he came through the door of that bar and saw the two women sitting across from each other, something moved across his face that was not surprise. It was the expression of a man who has just understood the full shape of a situation he had been seeing only partially, and who recognizes that everything he does next will determine everything that follows. He sat down, and Amara looked at him and said, "We have a problem, and we're going to fix it together. And when it's fixed, I need to know that nothing like this will ever be pointed at me or anything I've built again." He looked back at her, and his answer was not a promise made with words. It was the look of a man who had spent 13 years understanding the cost of failing to protect what mattered, and who had no intention of learning that lesson a second time. The three of them sat in that wine bar for 40 minutes, and by the end of it, the situation had been mapped with the precision of people who understood that imprecision was a luxury they could not afford. Shin Dae-ho had been building his parallel structure for 18 months. He had relationships with two organizations operating in New York, one with roots in the outer boroughs, one with connections to port logistics along the eastern seaboard. Neither was as large as the Baekryong syndicate. Together, consolidated under a single restructured leadership, they would be. The plan was not improvised. It was the product of a man who had been patient for 7 years and had finally decided the moment was correct. The mechanism for destabilizing Jae-min's authority publicly was Amara's organization. The mechanism for destabilizing it internally was the paternity lie. Both were designed to run simultaneously, the internal doubt and the external exposure, hitting at the same time, creating a crisis that Jae-min could not manage from two directions at once. Yuna had the timeline. She had been given it by Shin as a demonstration of capability, as he told her the plan in the specific way that powerful men sometimes told things to women they considered peripheral, thoroughly, because they assumed the woman had nowhere to take the information. He had miscalculated. "He moves in 5 days," Yuna said. "That's the window he set. He's waiting for a council meeting that Jae-min called for next week. He intends to bring the challenge to the full council with the paternity claim already public and the investigation into your organization already opened." Jae-min sat across the table with both hands flat on the surface and his face completely controlled, and Amara watched him process this with the focused stillness of someone converting information directly into operational calculation. "The council meeting," he said. "Who else knows the date?" "4 people inside the organization," Yuna said. "Shin has at least one of them." "Which one?" "I don't know. He didn't tell me that." Jae-min looked at Amara. "I need to make calls." "Make them," she said. He stepped away from the table. Amara sat across from Yuna and listened to the bar's ambient noise and thought about 5 days. 5 days was not very much time. 5 days was enough time for a man who had been preparing for 18 months to execute something that had been architected in detail. "You understand," Yuna said quietly, "that when this is over, however it ends, I have no standing in it." Amara looked at her. "You came here and gave us the timeline. That's standing." "That's survival," Yuna said. "Don't make it more than it is." Amara looked at her steadily. "What do you need?" "When this is done." Yuna's composure shifted slightly. Barely. A hairline thing. "I need to not be in anyone's debt." "You won't be," Amara said. "Bob." Jaemin was on the phone for 22 minutes. Amara tracked the time without meaning to, watching him through the bar window where he stood on the sidewalk, his back partially to the glass, the controlled tension of his posture visible even at distance. When he came back in, his face was the same, but something behind it had rearranged. He sat down. "One of my senior staff has been feeding Shin information for 4 months," he said. "I know who it is." "How?" Amara said. "Because I gave different information to 4 people and only one of them received what Shin just demonstrated he knows." His voice was flat. "It's a basic isolation technique. I should have run it months ago." "What happens to him?" Yuna said. Jaemin looked at her. "That's not your concern." "I want to know what kind of man I just handed information to," Yuna said. "That is my concern." A pause. He'll be removed, Jamin said, from the organization, from any position of access. He won't be hurt. Yuna held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. The 5-day window, Jamin said. I'm not going to wait for it. I'm going to move in 48 hours. Against Shin directly, Amara said. Against the structure he's built, Jamin said. Shin without his alliances is a dissatisfied old man with grievances. The alliances are the threat. I dismantle those first. In 48 hours. Yes, she looked at him. And my organization? I have a contact in the city comptroller's office, he said. Someone I've done legitimate work with. I'm going to have the documentation of any pending investigation requests pulled and reviewed before they can be officially filed. If Shin has already initiated that process, we stop it in the next 24 hours. That's interference with its prevention, he said. Nothing illegal has been filed. Nothing illegal has been investigated. We are preventing a false complaint from becoming a formal record. That is not interference. That is timing. She held his gaze. You're very calm, she said. I'm not calm, he said. I'm operational. There's a difference. She understood that distinction in her own bones. She went home that night and did not sleep and did not expect to. She sat at the kitchen table with her phone on the surface in front of her and thought about the architecture of what the next 48 hours required and understood, clearly and without drama, that she was now inside something that she had not chosen and could not exit without cost. She could walk away. Jamin had told her in the diner that he would walk away if she asked him to, and she believed him, which was almost the most frightening thing about the situation. Not the danger of Shin Dae-ho's plan, but the fact that she had reached the point where she believed Kang Jae-min when he said something. She could walk away and Shin would still have the information about her organization. The threat to her work, to the communities she had spent 7 years serving, did not disappear because she removed herself from the personal dimension of the situation. The trap had already been built around her. The only variable was whether she stood inside it alone or not. At 1 in the morning, Jae-min texted, "Are you all right?" Not a question, a check. The period instead of the question mark was specific, like he was trying not to apply pressure. She typed back, "No, but functional." 3 seconds. Then, "That's enough for tonight." She put the phone down and stared at the ceiling and thought, 13 years. And then she stopped thinking about 13 years and started thinking about what needed to happen in the next 48 hours, because that was the thing she could actually affect. The first crack appeared at hour 14. Jamin's team had been working through the night. The contact in the comptroller's office confirmed that a complaint referral had been drafted but not yet filed. It was sitting in a queue, scheduled for submission the following morning. The referral cited anonymous concerns about a nonprofit's governance and alleged connections to foreign financial interests. The language was careful and technically legal and would have triggered a mandatory review process that could take 6 months to resolve and would freeze the organization's city funding in the interim. Jamin called her at 6:45 in the morning. "It's been pulled," he said. "It will not be filed." She exhaled. "How?" "The person who drafted it works for a city official who owes a debt to a man who owes a debt to me," he said. 3 degrees. The draft was reviewed, flagged as improperly sourced, and withdrawn. "And if Shin tries again?" "He can try," Jamin said. "Every subsequent attempt will be slower and more visible. He needed the first filing to go through quietly. That window is closed." "That's one piece," she said. "One piece," he agreed. "I have a meeting in 2 hours with representatives from both of the organizations Shin has been cultivating. I intend to demonstrate to them that Shin's plan is not executable and that the cost of continuing to associate with him outweighs the benefit." "How do you demonstrate that?" "By being in the room," he said. "By being visibly, operationally intact. By showing them that the man they are betting against is not the destabilized, distracted figure Shin has been describing. And if they don't respond to that?" A pause. "Then I use other arguments." "Don't tell me what those are," she said. "I wasn't going to," he said. The meeting happened in a building in Long Island City that had the external appearance of a commercial property management office and the interior atmosphere of a place where significant decisions were made by people who did not discuss them afterward. Jae-min arrived with 2 men and took a seat at a table with 5 people he had never been in a room with before, which was itself a demonstration. The head of the Baekryong syndicate did not come to other people's tables. He had come to this one, and the deliberateness of that was a language everyone present understood. He laid out the situation without embellishment. Shin Dae-ho had represented to them that Jae-min's leadership was compromised and that a transition was imminent. Jae-min was present to correct that representation. He was not compromised. The transition was not imminent, and any organization that had positioned itself in anticipation of Shin's restructuring plan would find, in the current reality, that they had made a commitment to a plan that did not exist. He told them what he knew about their operations, specific, detailed, the kind of information that demonstrated a surveillance capability they had not known about. He told them this not as a threat, but as a demonstration of situational awareness. He told them that the Baekryong Syndicate's position in New York was stable, and that the opportunities he was prepared to discuss with legitimately operating partners were real and ongoing. He told them that Shin Dae-ho's window had closed. One of the men across the table, heavy-set, late 50s, the deliberate stillness of someone who had survived long enough to develop patience, looked at him for a long moment and said, "You moved faster than he said you could." He underestimated what I was willing to do, Jae-min said. Why? Because he thought I was distracted, Jae-min said. He was wrong about what distracted means. The meeting ended without formal agreement, but it ended without conflict, which in the relevant language was a form of agreement. The men across the table had come to measure him, and they had taken his measure, and they would now recalculate. He was outside the building and on the phone with Amara within 4 minutes of leaving the table. "The alliances are neutralized," he said. She was in her office. He could hear the background noise of her workplace, the ordinary sound of a day that was running parallel to all of this. Both of them? Effectively. They'll step back from Shin. Without them, he brings a challenge to the council with nothing behind it. "He'll still bring it," she said. "Yes," Jae-min said. "He will. And I'll be ready." Shin Dae-ho moved on the 3rd day. Not the 5th. The 3rd accelerated, which meant he had realized his timeline had been compromised, which meant someone had told him the meeting in Long Island City had happened, which meant the information leak in the organization had not been entirely sealed. Jae-min found out at 8 in the morning when his phone showed 3 rapid messages from his most trusted lieutenant. Shin is calling an emergency session. He has documentation. He is claiming the paternity test was falsified. Jae-min was in the hotel suite. He read the messages and set the phone on the desk and stood at the window for approximately 30 seconds, looking at the city below. Then he picked the phone back up and called Amara. "It's today," he said. "What do you need?" she said. "Immediate. No preamble." "The paternity test results came back this morning," he said. "Clean. Confirm not mine. I need Yuna to be willing to state that publicly to the council." A pause. "You're asking her to go into a room full of people she has reason to be afraid of." "Yes." "That's a significant ask." "I know," he said, "which is why I'm asking you to ask her, not me." She understood why. Yuna had walked into a wine bar to give information to the woman her choices had hurt. That was not something she would do for Jae-min. That was something she might do for herself, if the ask came from someone who had looked at her without hatred. "I'll call her," Amar said. "Amara." "I know," she said. "Go. Do what you need to do. I'll handle this." She called Yuna at 8:14. Yuna answered on the 3rd ring, and her voice was the same composed surface with the same pressure underneath it. "I know why you're calling," Yuna said. "Will you do it?" A silence. "If I go into that room, I'll make sure you have a way out of it," Amar said. "I'm not asking you to walk in without a door." "You can't guarantee that." "No," Amara said. "But I can tell you that the man who is asking has more to lose than you do, and he is asking anyway." Another silence. Longer. "Where?" Yuna said. The council session was held in a private facility in Midtown that the syndicate used for formal proceedings. A conference room that was architecturally unremarkable and functionally significant, the kind of space where the walls had absorbed the weight of decisions over many years. 8 people were present when Jaemin walked in. Dae-ho sat at the far end of the table, and the years of organizational patience had distilled in his face into something that was almost serene, the expression of a man who believed he had already won. He was 61 years old, and he had been waiting for this for 7 years, and the serenity was real, Jaemin understood. It was not performance. Shin genuinely believed the ground was his. "You called this session outside protocol," Jaemin said, taking his seat at the head of the table. His voice was even. "That itself is a matter for the record." "The circumstances required urgency," Shin said. His voice was smooth, measured, the voice of a man accustomed to rooms. "I have documentation indicating that the paternity test results presented by leadership were obtained improperly and that the results themselves may have been manipulated." "Present the documentation," Jaemin said. Shin placed a folder on the table, 2 pages. Jaemin did not reach for them. "The documentation," Jaemin said, "was prepared by a consultant who has been on your payroll for 14 months. I have the payment records." He placed his own folder on the table. "I also have the original test results, the chain of custody documentation from the independent laboratory, and a signed statement from the laboratory director confirming the integrity of the process." Shin's serenity did not break, but something around the edges of it adjusted. "The question of the child's paternity," Jaemin continued, "has already been settled by evidence. What hasn't been settled is why a senior council member chose to fabricate a counter-narrative rather than accept that evidence. I'd like to address that now." He looked at Shin directly. The room was very quiet. "You've been building a parallel structure for 18 months, Jaemin said. 2 external partnerships, 1 internal source, a plan to use a nonprofit organization and a private individual as mechanisms of public exposure. I have the documentation for all of it." He paused. "And I have a witness." The door opened. Yuna Seo walked in. She was wearing a dark coat. Her posture was the same composed, closed-off posture that Amara had seen in the photograph 3 weeks ago, but something in it had changed. It was not the composure of concealment now. It was the composure of someone who had made a decision and was standing inside it. She sat in the chair that had been placed at the side of the table, not at either end, neutral ground deliberately positioned. "Miss Seo," Jaemin said, "please tell the council what Shin Dae-ho asked you to do, and what he told you in the course of asking." Yuna looked at Shin. He looked back at her, and for the first time the serenity showed its actual composition, which was calculation, and the calculation was running in real time, assessing whether she would do it, whether the information she had was precise enough to matter, whether he had left himself any exit. "He asked me to publicly claim that the child I'm carrying belongs to Kang Jae-min," Yuna said. Her voice was even. "He told me that this claim, combined with an ongoing investigation into a nonprofit organization with connections to Jae-min, would create sufficient instability in the leadership to justify a council challenge. He told me the names of the 2 external organizations he had made commitments to. He told me the date of his planned move." She paused. "He told me all of this in my apartment 3 weeks ago, because he believed I was a person without options, and therefore a person without agency." The room absorbed this. Shin looked at Yuna for a long moment. Then he looked at Jae-min. The serenity was gone. What was underneath it was not panic. It was the cold, specific anger of a patient man who has just watched the thing he built for 7 years come apart in a conference room in Midtown. "You have no authority to," he started. "The council has authority," Jae-min said. "That's why we're here." What happened next took 4 minutes. The council was not a democratic body, and it did not deliberate in the manner of one. It operated on demonstrated power and on the reading of situations, and the situation in that room had been read. 3 of the remaining 6 members spoke. 2 of them said enough to make the position of the room clear. Shin Dae-ho was removed from the council. He sat at the far end of the table and absorbed this with the stillness of a man who had run out of moves but had not yet run out of pride. He looked at Jae-min once more before the session closed, and the look was not concession. It was the look of a man setting something down that he intended to pick back up. "This isn't finished," Shin said. His voice was quiet enough that only Jae-min heard it. "It is for you," Jae-min said. "Walk away clean. That's the only option left." Shin stood. He straightened his jacket. He walked out of the room with the measured pace of a man who had practiced dignity in defeat, and the door closed behind him, and the room exhaled. Jamin sat at the head of the table and felt the specific exhaustion of a crisis that had been contained rather than resolved, which was the only kind of resolution available in the world he operated in. He looked at Yuna, who was still sitting in the side chair, her hands now in her lap, the composure slightly less armored than it had been 20 minutes ago. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once. "We're even," she said. "Yes," he said. "We are." She stood and left, and he sat alone at the table for a moment before reaching for his phone. Amara answered before the first ring completed. "It's done," he said. A silence. He could hear her breathing. "Shin?" "Removed." The counsel stood. He paused. Yuna did what she said she would. Another silence. "Are you all right?" she said. He thought about the question. He thought about the last 72 hours and the 48 before those and the 14 months before those and the 13 years before those. "Come to the hotel," he said. "Please." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Give me an hour." She arrived in 53 minutes, which he clocked without meaning to, standing at the window of the suite watching the street below. When she knocked, he opened the door and she stood in the hallway, still in her work coat, her hair slightly undone from the wind, her face carrying the specific fatigue of someone who had been holding themselves together at significant cost. She stepped inside. He closed the door. They stood in the middle of the suite and looked at each other, and the thing between them was not simple and it was not resolved, and it was not the romantic conclusion of a contained crisis. It was two people standing in the aftermath of 72 hours that had stripped away the last distance between them, looking at what was actually there, which was significant and terrifying and real. She crossed the room. She stood in front of him and reached up and put her hand flat on his chest, over his sternum, and he stood very still because he understood the gesture was not an invitation. It was a verification. She was checking, with her hand, whether he was real and present and intact. His heartbeat was there under her palm, fast, not controlled. For once in this entire situation, genuinely not controlled. "We need to talk about what comes next," she said. Her voice was quiet. "I know," he said. "Not tonight," she said, "but soon." "Soon," he agreed. She left her hand where it was for another moment. He raised his hand and placed it over hers, not gripping, just covering. The same gesture returned, the same verification, the same need to confirm that the other person was real. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Something in her face changed, a sharp, sudden shift that moved from stillness to alarm in the space of a single breath. She looked up at him. "It's my doctor," she said. "She's been running the follow-up tests, the ones from last month." Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing her something. "She needs me to come in, today." She said. Amara stopped. Her hand was still under his. She said the results are complicated and she doesn't want to discuss them over the phone. The room held that sentence. Jamin looked at her. He saw the 16-year-old girl in the hospital hallway and the 34-year-old woman in front of him and understood that they were the same person, that the years had not separated them, that the thing Amara had carried since she was 16 years old was not in the past. It was in that phone call. It was in the doctor's careful voice saying complicated. It was in the specific way Amara's shoulders had moved when she read the message, the way a person's body moves when it recognizes an old enemy by its footsteps before it even appears. "I'm coming with you," he said. She looked at him. She started to say something. He could see it, the reflex of a woman who had been alone in hospital hallways and had organized her entire adult life around never needing someone to come with her. She stopped herself. "Okay," she said. And the word cost her something and meant everything. And the two of them stood in the hotel suite with her hand under his and his hand over hers, and outside the window the city went on without them, enormous and indifferent, while something between them became, without announcement or ceremony, irreversible. The doctor's name was Reeves, and she had kind eyes and the specific practiced manner of someone who delivered difficult news often enough to have developed a method for it, which was to give you everything at once rather than in pieces, because pieces were worse. Amara sat in the examination room in a chair beside the desk, and Jaimin sat in the chair beside her, close enough that their arms were touching, and Dr. Reeves laid the test results on the desk and said, "The scar tissue we identified last year has changed, not in the direction we hoped." Amara heard the words. She registered each one individually. She sat very straight in the chair with her hands in her lap and felt Jaimin's arm against hers and breathed. "What does that mean for pregnancy?" she said. "It means that natural conception is unlikely," Dr. Reeves said. "We already knew that. What the new results indicate is that IVF would also carry significant challenges. It's not impossible. But I want to be honest with you about the probabilities because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve optimism." The room was very quiet. A clock on the wall made a sound that Amara had not noticed before and now could not stop noticing. "Give me the numbers," Amara said. Dr. Reeves gave her the numbers. Amara sat with them. She did not cry. She had cried about this before. Not in front of anyone, not with witnesses, but she had done the private work of crying about it, and she was past the part where the numbers made her cry. The numbers now just made her tired. The specific tiredness of a person receiving information they already knew in their bones and have been living around for years. Beside her, Jae-min had not moved. He was not looking at the doctor. He was looking at the desk, at the papers, and she could see him processing, not performing, not managing his reaction for her benefit, actually processing. In the same way he had processed everything in the last 72 hours, which was